Good afternoon, folks. My name is Rami Shami, and I'm a case manager for Kensington Health. I am outside. Take two. I am outside because what better way to demonstrate the creativity that us as caregivers have to engage in present day caregiving. It is actually I am actually on vacation this week. Um, However, caregivers don't get a day off. And as such, I want to be in alignment with that because I am also an informal caregiver for two older adults, my mother and my father. My father is in a palliative trajectory. My mom has chronic ailments, and as the oldest, as customer in our in our culture, it's up to me to provide that kind of support. We still good, Don? Yep. All right. As a profession, I am a case manager with Kensington Health, but I'm also a coordinator, an outreach coordinator with Lighthouse for Grieving Children, and I also work as a consultant for hospice palliative care across the province. Do a lot of teaching. A lot of my work is caregiver support, caregiver education, bereavement support, and end of life bed sitting. So sitting for people with people who are living a life limiting illness, especially at end of life. But all of this I'm sharing with you because I recognize also that caregiving during a pandemic is exceptionally difficult. I can appreciate that. I work in the field, but I also provide support informally for my family in the field while caregiving for a child. So it is challenging. It is definitely demanding for many of us in that respect. Um, I hope you're all still it's all still good. Can somebody send me a message say we're all good? Ruth, are we still good? Yeah. All right. So in this presentation, folks, I'm going to talk about how COVID has really disrupted and added stress to our lives, and I'm going to do it from outside because I basically I live in a basement apartment, and most of my work is at the office at Kensington Health. So if I can't walk the walk, then how can I ask other caregivers if they could take the time to be outside? But COVID-19 has truly disrupted and added stress into our lives, and in many ways, it's been immeasurable in the stress that it's added. Caregiver burnout and mental health. I mean, it's always been a concern, right? Especially for healthcare and social services. But now it's almost as if caregiving has accentuated the sense of loneliness and isolation like never before in the history of caregiving. From one perspective, I've heard from caregivers. A lot of what I'm going to share with you is from caregivers, and some of it is formal uh, information. From one perspective, being at home has been easier for some caregivers if they're working from home or we're in stay at home because it eases, hopefully, going into the office or going into workplaces because we're working from home. Employers have had to be more flexible, but that hasn't been in every case because the more we're at home as caregivers, the more we don't get a break, the more we don't have any chance to get out and be outside or do the activities or even engage in anything that would be constituting as care for ourselves as caregivers, let alone how everything has been shut down and stay at home orders. I mean, I barely can come out today and to present and just to be outside and absorb some sun. But there's also very little time for a break because of the shortage of supports like personal caregivers, like day programs for older adults. Also this fear by caregivers, and rightfully so, including myself. Even though I'm vaccinated, I'm still very careful of getting infected with COVID themselves because if they get infected, what happens to the person they're caring for? Or if they bring it home, right? If I go to my parents' home to provide some caregiving, if I bring it there, there's always this heightened sense of alertness or threat. And on top of that, unfortunately, personal support workers, any kind of outside help into the home is an added cost. And unfortunately, some organizations who are providing private personal care have have increased their pricing because there's supply and demand. And in a supply and demand, there's a shortage of support and personal support workers. And as such, we have needed more support in that way. Yes, I'll move my bike away. I just wanted to make sure you folks can hear me. Um, so, with increased financial stress or burden, and the stay-at-home orders that we might not be going into workplaces. And if we add a little bit more to that, that even with the added financial stress and working from home, some of us are not able to work, we're on CERB, then it just adds to the financial stress. And the stress is immeasurable. It's said that 54% of caregivers in a study done by the Ontario Caregiver organization in December of this year said caregiving is way more difficult now because of COVID. So let's look at some of the things of how things have changed. Let's take a look. Oh, you're very welcome, John. I'm glad you could join us and less plosives. I hear you. I hear you. This mic is really sensitive and it picks up absolutely everything. That's why I put it close to my mouth. Anyways, let's look at what has changed. Caregiving, the responsibility of caregiving is in and of itself more time consuming. In balancing even the emotional and behavioral support or providing that for somebody we're caregiving, we have to provide transportation and tasks around the home, all within COVID. And if we add social distancing or physical distancing and the isolation and the restrictions, the consumption of time for a caregiver is enormous because we have to make sure, for example, if we have private care coming into the home, we have to make sure that they're wearing masks, that their hands are sanitized, maybe temperature checks. They may not be able to show up. They may get sick. And that just adds, and what happens to caregivers? They have to step in where the private care has, or even, the care provided by the government in terms of the LIN has not been able to come forth for whatever reason. And I think there's even more of a need for respite for caregivers. In that regard, if we have a financial burden and we have to do more with less because there's less services out there, there's actually a heightened need for respite for caregivers themselves. So it's double whammy. There's a need, there's an added stress and an added taxing and time consuming of consumption of caregiving. And then on top of that, there is less services and more need for respite for caregivers. So it ends up being almost like a double challenge for caregivers. All the concerns that are traditional and common for caregivers are amplified now during COVID. Trying to meet care needs during isolation while protecting ourselves, because I'm one of you in terms of a caregiver, both professionally paid and informally, unpaid. Trying to protect ourselves and trying to protect our families, and the stress of having the threat of being infected with COVID while we're providing caregiving for a family member just adds to the sense of isolation. So I'm always thinking in my mind, do I go over to my parents to caregive for them? Can they handle it today? Am I going to put them at risk if I come over? What should I do? Every day it's like that for me. And I can't imagine what it's like for most of you. It ends up leaving us as caregivers because also I can't, because of the isolation and the stay-at-home orders, I can't necessarily ask family members like my brother who lives in Aurelia to come down and to help, or to friends who used to come over and make sure that my parents were taken care of if I was at work, or especially in my job that's very demanding, or that I had something for my child. So that leaves me very isolated. And I can only imagine it can leave you feeling lonely and isolated and even depressed on your parts because we're doing this really alone. We might have been doing it alone before COVID, but it's extra alone now during COVID. I feel there's even this increase after the pandemic is brought under control. And I'm not saying cured or stopped. I'm saying brought under control to remain optimistic and realistic that this will all continue. It's not as if we can stop the stress levels or, diminish the feeling of threat from a pandemic that is instilled in us and infused in us because of what has happened during the pandemic. This might carry on. We might have the pandemic under control, but the caregiving needs and the stress and the burnout that's happened during COVID is not all of a sudden going to go away. So that's another aspect that I feel we have to be mindful of, that this is in for the long haul, regardless of what the caregiving duties are. I know with my parents, they might live another 10, 15 years, but I have to be in it for the long haul because of if I burn out now, what's going to happen in a few years when the pandemic is under control? And what I've heard from so many caregivers is that we are doing more with less. which leaves us feeling overwhelmed, which actually, in many cases, and I'll be the first to admit it, may leave us feeling short tempered, trapped, helpless, even not appreciated. And again, I'll be very transparent with you, oftentimes resentful. Yes, there are moments where I actually feel resentful for the tax and load that I have on myself that takes away from my well being and my child and my activities and my work for caregiving duties during a pandemic and a stay at home orders. It's even the more with less is that there's less services out there. There's less PSWs. There's no day programs that are really running or operating in person. Transportation is always a risk. Emergency surgeries, or even sorry, not emergency surgeries, but um, surgeries that are elective are postponed. So my parents have elective surgeries that have to be postponed, which puts their quality of life um, at a challenge. And all this is weighing on you and me. You know, well, not my parents on you, but my parents, my family on me. And this is assuming older adults, because some people are caregiving for younger adults. Some are caregiving for family members. Some caregiving are, especially with cancer, it could be a child, it could be a teenager, it could be. I know some people that come to our caregiver group, Caregiver Connect, on Wednesdays with Wellspring and Kensington. They're caregiving for a 23, 24, 25-year-old or 30-year-old, as with Ruby and Gonzalo. So the magnitude of caregiving during a pandemic is really taking it to a new level. And if I can reiterate the financial impact, we're incurring higher costs. There is an element of business to it. There is an element of scarcity to it. And so there's higher costs. Now we have to, if you have private caregivers coming into the home, you have to most likely provide sanitizer, some measures of infection control, masks. These are all incurring costs, right? And if not for them, as for ourselves as well. So I know some caregivers have using up their entire savings. They're like, okay, I'll survive the pandemic, but my burden is what's going to happen after the pandemic as a caregiver. And as I mentioned, private care is costing way more now. I can't imagine at some of the numbers that I've been thrown at for private caregiving. I don't know who could afford them, right? But it's the challenge. And also, private caregivers themselves have to still work, so they may be working in a long-term care facility and doing private clients, which technically I don't believe is allowed by law, but it's happening. I hear that from caregivers. Now, again, to revisit working remotely, because as you can see today, I am working remotely on vacation. Um, some have said their responsibilities to work have become easier because they could work from home. But balancing work and caregiving responsibilities is very challenging. I can't tell you how often I hear people saying, "Listen, don't feel, don't feel, don't think I have it good because I'm at home now. That means I can't take a break. That means I can't turn it off because the person I'm caring for is right next to me or right in the other room." So even though I don't necessarily have to leave and come back if something happens, I can't necessarily turn it off. Work was my escape, right? Or activities were my escape. And this is assuming that employers are flexible, which not all employers have been flexible with caregivers during COVID. I talked to some caregivers and they're very much challenged with what's happening in their employment or their with their employers in providing accommodations to work from home or be from home while they're providing caregiving. And most employers don't have, I mean, this hit us so fast. So who had a pandemic protocol in place for employers in terms of policies? Very few. We didn't even have that, right? As a social service organization. And so they don't have formal policies for flexing hours to deal with caregiving tasks. Most employers don't. Most employers don't have much of a bereavement leave either. But to formalize, I mean, it's moving forward now in terms of employers developing formal policies for employees to flex their hours for caregiving duties because of the explosion of the demand for caregiving duties. We live the population is changing, and especially with respect to and so the caregiving duties have become you know equal or if not more demanding than our work lives, and that's not even negating people who are retirees and supporting somebody that they're married to or living with. So what can we do? Um, what can be done? I oftentimes feel, and this happened in our group last week at Wellspring in the evening. Sometimes we feel, even as a care provider myself, that there isn't much we can do, but there is. There are some things. And for example, just today, with all the duties that I have as a formal and informal caregiver and as a parent, I'm outside. I decided to do this presentation, even though there's glitches and I'm appreciate all your accommodations. I'm going to be outside for the next hour, however long we have left, to absorb some sunshine because I need it. I need it for myself. But what else can we do? I mean, the paths today here in Stony Creek are full. I mean, the people are out there and socially distanced and physically distanced. But I also hear from caregivers that they can't get outside. So here are some of the resources that we do have right now, folks. And I'm not sure if you're aware of them. I just want to share them with you in terms of what they are. And I ask you to contact myself in Wellspring so that you can get the leads and support. I'm not just going to dump information on you and say, hey, check the internet. No, we want to help you and support you and walk you through this if you need it. One of those supports is our Caregiver Connect group that meets once a week on Wednesdays, either during the day or in the evenings. Just check Wellspring website for the times because it alternates. First and third Wednesdays, it's during the evening, 6 to 7:30, and the third Wednesdays, it's during the day, 1:30 to 3. But just for the exact times, check their website, and that's an opportunity for all of you to come and share your caregiving struggles and challenges and triumphs and insights and learnings, so that we could create a sense of community. And even if we don't learn anything from one another in terms of knowledge, it's that sense of community. It's that sense of I am not alone. I heard that so often in this Caregiver Connect group. At least I'm not alone. At least, I have others who bring a sense of, I hate to use this word, but I'm going to use it anyways, a sense of normalcy or commonality to what we're experiencing, that I'm not the only one in this plight. And the irony of it is that at least a third of Canadians, if not, 2/5 of Canadians are in the same plight as all of us in terms of providing caregiving duties, or tasks. There are a lot of great Wellspring programs, mindfulness, what have you. I'm also running a mindfulness program at Kensington Health. You're more than welcome to come. It's on Tuesdays from 6 to 7:30. Drop me an email. I will leave you with my email. You could hear the kids in the background. You could tell here I'm outside. It's nice to hear the sound of children. Honestly, it's just it feels a sense of normalcy, to be honest. But that's just me. And in this mindfulness group, it's all caregivers from the hospice, from the long-term care facility where I work at, from the community who come and engage for themselves just an hour or an hour and a half of being present and being focused on their own state and their own well-being in themselves once a week. And sometimes that's just enough to turn off our fight or flight, to lower our sense of hyperarousal. I appreciate it so much because even though I'm facilitating this mindfulness group, I am able to gain some respect of well-being from the mindfulness itself, because I have to practice mindfulness almost every day just to sustain myself. And with mindfulness, folks, it's really all you need is about 5 to 7 minutes a day, and I think we all can manage that. And we teach that in this mindfulness program. So you're welcome to join us. And I believe Wellspring has a program as such. And these webinars are recorded. There's a number of webinars we recorded that I facilitate indoors that speak to other aspects of caregiving, such as guilt, such as the traumatization caused by caregiving, such as LGBTQ plus and caregiving. There's a lot of aspects of caregiving on the webinars, in these webinars on the Wellspring website. You might already know that, and I'm speaking to you, so you could check the websites, but there are actual provincial supports that very few people know about in terms of COVID and caregiving. Every year, the Ontario government does a study called by the Ontario Caregiver Organization. It does a study and provides feedback and stats regarding caregivers. The one it did in December of this year was really impactful because it was about COVID. It was called the COVID edition. And from that COVID edition, they developed a lot of resources, which I'm going to share with you right now, verbally. And I don't want to just leave it with you. So please contact me or Wellspring, and I'll guide you through these programs, and I can suggest programs and tell you how they work and what have you. But they develop these strategies and resources for you to use during the pandemic. And one of them is actually the 24/7 Ontario Caregiver Helpline and live chat. It's one number that you can go there and find out all the aspects of of caregiver resources within the community, or if you would like to talk to somebody, because I provide one-on-one caregiver support, but there are other professionals. I'm not a social worker or a psychotherapist, but there's professionals that can be referred to that can provide a more in-depth psychosocial support through this chat line. And it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week that somebody will answer the phone. Okay. Um, the government has also developed the Ontario, we'll call it OCO, the Ontario Caregiver Organization, has created toolkits for caregivers during COVID. And one of them is called the Caregiver Starter Kit. And another one's called Work and the Caregiver, a Balancing Act. So two cool toolkits that give you structured strategies and resources of how to manage caregiving during the pandemic. So you don't have to hear it from me. This is the, researchers in the government being able to put these toolkits together that you could look at in your own time and go through, or you can contact me or someone at Wellspring and we will walk you through it. They have another program called SCALE, SCALE. And what that stands for is Supporting Caregiver Awareness, Learning, and Empowerment. In the SCALE program, there's weekly webinars, such as the one that I'm giving you right now, that talk about some of the caregiver strategies and supports. But there's also online group coaching. So maybe not so much as a peer support like we have in our group at Wellspring in Kensington, but it's a group coaching caregivers through these very difficult, unprecedented times. And then they have one-on-one telephone counseling that can support you as a caregiver. I have many clients who I support one-on-one, not so much in the counseling, but more in a peer support model. I'm a caregiver. I'm an informal caregiver, as I've mentioned, and I could share experiences and walk along somebody else who's providing caregiving in a one-to-one capacity. But they actually provide, in this SCALE program, they actually provide counseling, psychosocial emotional counseling, which I do a actual part of it, but I can't call it counseling. And these individuals are trained and as professionals in it. And then OCO, Ontario Caregiver Organization, has a webinar series, as I mentioned before. And they have a range of topics from finances, how to manage your finances, which I know nothing about. I don't know why. I just been horrible in my finances in terms of caregiver support. But they also talk about privacy as caregiver, some of the challenges with privacy, and of course, caregiver wellness, which is my expertise. I'm not financially well, but I'm very well caregiver wise and what have you. But anyways, in these webinar series, they have these aspects of support. They also provide COVID-19 tip sheets, which is really interesting. I love the languaging, a contingency plan for caregivers who may have either contracted COVID or are thinking in the future of what life might be like as a caregiver post-COVID, or as we bring the pandemic under control. They also speak more formally into caregiver mental health and how to use technology, like I'm doing today, more effectively. And I'm not sure if I'm being effective today, but they teach also how to use technology more effectively. I know, we've learned during the pandemic how much we assume that we have barrier-free engagements. And what I mean by that, we assume everybody can be on Zoom. Well, what about people who don't have internet? What about individuals or caregivers who are of a generation that may not know how to use Zoom? It's not that necessarily that user friendly, or don't how to have a outdated computer, or any of those technological pieces. They can help you with in that regard. There's also a peer mentoring program, which is very similar to ours. And so it's good to have multiple peer mentoring programs for the simple reason that they meet at different times. They have different groups of people, somewhat different objectives, right? Ours has a cancer focus, but others may not have a necessarily cancer focus because it may not be what you want to focus on in terms of your caregiver challenges. And they also have other online support groups that you might be able to engage with that um, may not ours may not necessarily align with you. We want to be able to provide as many opportunities for people to engage in some kind of support group that it's not about the organization's fit, but it's about the fit for the individuals. Now let me check. I think we had a question online. You know what? I'm going to provide the website, and actually, I'll send it to. Thank you for asking that. What I didn't want to do is just dump the website out there and the links and say, good luck. I want to be able to provide the support as well. So I will share the link with Wellspring, and I'll provide it actually right now once we're done this piece. But please feel free to contact me at Kensington so that I can help you through these programs if you so wish. Okay. So, yes, absolutely. Yeah. The other thing I've also heard from caregivers is some challenges that they're having with the providers themselves, right? What I mean by that is that, unfortunately, I've heard from some caregivers that their providers are coming in and refusing to wear masks. They may not be sanitizing. They may have colds. So unfortunately, there isn't a universal standard for care providers, private care providers, especially coming into the homes. I'm not going to get into the human resource liabilities of it, because I've had caregivers have to contact the organizations or even the LIN to say, why is your care provider not wearing a mask, or refusing to wear a mask, or not washing their hands, or not using hand sanitizer? Yes, these things do happen, but they also have a toolkit with the Ontario Caregiver organization that's called Partners in Care Pandemic Toolkit. And it's designed to support the safe presence of caregivers in healthcare settings. There's also an accredited online training for providers of caregiving. So for people who aren't necessarily formal, but I'd suggest even informal caregivers take the online training so you know what you could coach or teach or guide your private caregivers in what they need to do, right? I think knowledge is empowering. And if you know something about what they should be doing or how they should be doing it, especially if you're not sure, if you're questioning, here are two pieces to it. One is the toolkit of what parameters they should be following in, especially if you are uncertain of how they should be engaging the person you're caring for. And there's an online training that you could take, or ask the providers to take, or ask the organization who's sending the care providers to take. Now, that all being said, I do want to bring one other measure to your awareness. And I've talked about this before, but I feel I really need to reiterate it. And that is the fact that a constant threat of a virus out there, an invisible thing that could infect us, change us, harm us, be transmitted to someone we're caring for, can be a form of trauma, can be a form of traumatization, because it's been a year now of this constant veil or bubble of threat the world has been experiencing. And to be in a constant state of threat, in this imposing vulnerability, you might say, can cause our sympathetic nervous systems, which is the fight or flight response, or what we call the adrenaline response, to be on constant activation. And if it's on constant activation, we actually call this hyperarousal. So we're always on. So it ends up when we're always on, and our sympathetic nervous system is always triggered, and we're always in this fight or flight, is that it takes away what's called our parasympathetic nervous system, or a part of our nervous systems that is focused on sleeping, eating, digesting, resting, having sex, thinking in terms of work and education. And that's what actually can burn us out. That's why caregiving during a pandemic is a little bit different, a lot different than at any other time in human history. Caregiving during a pandemic is leaving us in a state of fight or flight. We need to find ways, such as mindfulness meditation, such as the resources that have been put forth by the Ontario Caregiver Organization to lower that fight or flight, to dissipate it, to kind of bring down our hyper arousal through some measures, which I've spoken to more clearly and more much more articulation in caregiving and traumatization webinar that is on the Wellspring website, so that we can sleep, so that we can rest, so that we can digest, so we can get nutrients, so we can actually, when we do something that's self-care-ish, such as going for walks, we're still not in hyperarousal, because there's no point going out for a walk or going for a swim or doing anything that's of a self-care nature if we are still remaining in this fight or flight hyperarousal without even necessarily recognize it, because it can leave us, in an exasperated stress response to our caregiving. It's like taking caregiving and pressurizing all the experiences. This is what caregiving during COVID is actually doing. It's taking caregiving, pressurizing it in a way that it turns all the stressors that we experience to what's 10 if not 100-fold response reactivity. It makes it much harder, right? And that's why you might be experiencing for the first time. I've heard this from caregivers as well. Oh, I was doing fine until COVID hit. Then, with the threat of the pandemic, the threat of COVID, and all the avenues with which to dissipate our caregiving stress, and the decrease in resources and the financial burden, it takes that experience, that stress, that response to being a caregiver, and just multiplies it. And that in itself, and an awareness of that, has helped a lot of caregivers and not feel that they've failed during COVID. I've heard that from caregivers as well, that they feel that they've failed as caregivers because they're not managing. Well, they're not recognizing necessarily, but the only failure in there is that they may not be recognizing it. It's not a failure. That the threat of the pandemic and all that's been curtailed and cut off due to the pandemic has caused caregiving to be not an impossibility, but feel like an impossible endeavor. With all that's been taken away. The other things that it leaves us, it can leave us leaving edgy, anxious, nervous, short fuses. And then where does that often end up? It ends up being projected or put on the person that we're caregiving for. And I've heard that from caregivers as well. So I hope you can be somewhat of some mindfulness of the pressure that COVID has caused in terms of caregiving. It's just put it in a pressure valve. Now, let me just reiterate. I'm going to look up the website for you right now and provide it for you in terms of the Ontario Caregiver Organization. Just to reiterate, there's a 24/7 Ontario Caregiver helpline. There are toolkits such as the Ontario Caregiver Starter Kit and the Work in Caregiver, a Balancing Act. There's the SCALE program supporting caregiver awareness, learning, and empowerment, which are weekly webinars, such as the one we do of online group coaching and one-on-one telephone counseling. There's the webinar series, especially when it comes to privacy and finances and caregiver wellness. There's the COVID-19 tip sheets, okay, especially when it comes to caregiver mental health and technology, how to do technology. So much of the resources towards caregiving is missing the technology piece. How do I come onto a Zoom group? How do I access webinars? How do I even log in to such platforms? There's a peer mentoring program, because there's something special about a peer mentoring program, right? What is meant by peer mentoring is that other caregivers who are experiencing the challenges of caregiver can relate to somebody else who's caregiving. They may not completely understand what the other person's going through, but they can relate, such as myself and the people that I support in caregiving, because I am a caregiver in the broadest sense as such. There's the online support groups, right? If ours doesn't meet your needs. And then for navigating those with navigating the challenges with providers, there's the Partners in Care Pandemic Toolkit, and then there's of course the kind of online training for caregivers as partners. That is all available, folks, on the Ontario Caregiving Organization website. Just type in Ontario Caregiver Organization .com, and then you should be able to receive that. I will send this link, and actually, what I'll also do, folks, I'll send the report, the actual report from the Ontario Caregiver Organization to Wellspring. I'll send it to Susie and Vinita and Don to share with you folks in terms of these resources. I think the more resources we can share, the better it is for all of us. With that being said, I'm going to open up the chat. If you have any questions, please feel free. You could type it into the chat, or you can write it in the question and answer. I'll be on for the next 5 or 7 minutes, and then I'm going to continue my vacation and go enjoy the sunshine. So if you have any questions, please feel free. I'm going to be on for the next 5 to 10 minutes to answer any of your comments or questions. Oh, there's one. Let's see if somebody has. Nope, that was answered. Oh, thank you, Jennifer. I'm not going to take a day off if caregivers can't take a day off. I mean, I'll take a portion of it off, but my heart goes out to all you as caregivers, because I can appreciate the challenges. I can very much appreciate the challenges. Thank you, Bradley. Thank you for joining us today. Again, I will share this information with Wellspring, but please, you know what? I'm gonna provide with you my email right here. I'm gonna type it into the chat. Okay, just give me a moment, and I want you to please feel free to email me if you have any concerns, any questions, any way that I could be of a support to you. It's rshami@kenstonhealth.org. Please feel free to get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to support you in that regard. Together, walk in together, supporting one another, aligned, sharing information, sharing knowledge, being creative. That's how we're going to get through this, folks. Thank you, Ruth Ann. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to mention one more time, the website is called ontariocaregiver.ca. I missed the word in there. My apologies. It's ontariocaregiver.ca. I'm going to, again, write that in the chat. All right. If there's no other questions and no other comments, thank you very much for joining us today. This is recorded, so it will be on the Wellspring website. And I hope you all stay safe and stay well. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you for all that you do as caregivers. Take good care.